It's really hard to be ambivalent about Donald Trump. You love him, you hate him. There's very little grey when it comes to the President-elect of the United States. He will be inaugurated by this time tomorrow as the 45th President of the United States, unless Barack Obama decides to cause some havoc and quit 5 hours before, put Joe Biden in as the 45th President of the US, just to mess with all of his 45th inauguration memorabilia stuff that he's had made as Donald Trump. But certainly, Donald Trump is massively outspoken, and the world is sitting on the edge of its seat, waiting to see what America's foreign and economic policy will be. First, it was going to be Mexico will build the wall. Then America said it'll build the wall and it'll claim back from Mexico. Exactly how? So many of the campaign promises that Donald Trump made, the populist promises, are things that are completely out of his power to deliver and are things that he's not going to be able to deliver on. But certainly he's going to have a very good go at changing the economics of the United States, chief amongst them the recall of Barack Obama's revolutionary healthcare program, Obamacare. This is the MoneyMakers. Joining me now to discuss this further is Mohammed Nalla, who is the head of strategic research and global markets at Nedbank Corporate and Investment Banking. By this time tomorrow, say it with me, President Donald. It's quite hard to President Donald Trump, and after 8 years of warmth and love and humanity, courtesy of the Obamas and happy, young, healthy children in the White House, we get Donald Trump.
You get Donald Trump, Bruce, and if you're struggling to say it, if you're struggling to verbalize, there's always Twitter.
Absolutely, where he does plenty of his best work. But President Donald Trump, elected in an unprecedented victory. Everyone expected Hillary Clinton to win. She didn't win. He is the president, and he will be there for at least the next 4 years. Is he going to change the shape not only of the United States, but the global economy in such a short period of time?
Well, Bruce, it's really a question of can he deliver on those lofty promises, as you indicated in your introduction. I mean, already he's caused waves. I used the Twitter analogy in jest, but the fact of the matter is it's becoming as important as your Reuters or your Bloomberg feed, simply because foreign policy matters are being debated or put out there on Twitter before anything else.
Mark Carney, the Bank of England head, the governor of the Bank of England, revealed that the Bank of England employs somebody to monitor Donald Trump's Twitter feed because what he says in social media moves markets.
Undoubtedly, and I think that's something that many market participants have gotten to grips with, is that this is a new world, it's a new way of engaging, and it's not necessarily a bad strategy. I mean, it's a strategy that saw Donald Trump being the most prevalent discussion point on Twitter and propelled him to the presidency. Remember, this is hot on the heels of things like the Arab Spring, for example, where social media was also a very large determining factor. So that's a different discussion going beyond obviously just Donald Trump. But the fact of the matter is, can he make those changes? Yes to some of them, no on others. And I think that reality is why you've had a lot of optimism priced into markets on the back of what's being called the Trump effect, if you want to call it that. And that optimism seems to be leaking out a little bit as we speak right now. That's simply because the pragmatic way of doing things, the fact that a lot of stuff's going to have to go through Congress, is going to mean that even if he succeeds in getting things across the line, it's going to take a lot longer than many people perhaps priced in at the start of this.
And that's, I suspect, is absolutely right. We're seeing the Dow resist going through the 20,000 level, and there is some element of concern. Social media, look, it worked for Michael Jordan at FNB. It elevated him into superhero status. For Donald Trump, it gives him a profile, it gives him an opportunity to basically frighten large companies. We've seen car manufacturers announce plans to change their manufacturing strategies. It is having the effect. He doesn't have to legislate it. He has to threaten to legislate it. He has to threaten punitive damages, and large corporates will comply. It, frankly, is a stroke of genius. You don't have to go through the boring process of actually making laws about it. You just have to threaten to do it, and you get a reaction.
In fact, that's what he's been very effective at doing. Remember, he's still the president-elect. He's not officially the president, but utilizing the social media platform that he has done exactly as you've indicated, is that the threat of potential action against these corporations have actually catalyzed them into changing direction. This is important because at the end of the day, President-elect Trump is going to claim credit for Barack Obama's job creation that you've had in the US economy over the last several years. He's going to claim these massive victories that come through. And is this beneficial for the US economy? Well, possibly in the shorter term, you might see an uptick in terms of consumer confidence indices. You've already seen them bouncing. If they bounce sustainably, you might see that follow through with an uptick in terms of consumption expenditure.
They're only going to stay elevated if there if there is a direct result of Trump's plans and promises of expansionary spending. The United States is sitting on, what, $20 trillion worth of debt, and this is something that is ballooning all the time as interest payments grow and as borrowing grows. Already sitting on a massive debt burden. Unless he can reinflate the US economy to make the dollar worth less and therefore lessen the burden of the debt over a long period of time, he's simply going to add fuel to the debt fire.
Undoubtedly, and that highlights just one of the incongruencies in Trump's policies and intent. Early on in the campaign, he stipulated that the debt was a big priority, but if you have a look at his fiscal expansion programs, if you have a look at his tax cuts, there's no way he can decrease the debt and deliver on those promises. So our central view right now is that he probably delivers on some of the promises. Tax cuts are probably one of the more likely ones that he can get across the floor, simply because he has the Republican, the Senate, as well as House of Representatives, both on his side, and that should give you a little bit of a bump. But I would certainly expect that increase in US debt to remain a feature of the Trump presidency. The question mark is, does he continue to serve his full 4 terms? I mean, the bookies that were notoriously wrong in saying that he wouldn't be president are now, in some instances, saying he won't last a year.
On what basis, though?
On the basis that he's got massive conflicts of interest, on the basis that he's
got a big fat red self-destruct button in the middle of his forehead,
and an 140 character habit, which might serve to make him probably one of the more impeachable presidents in US history. I'm not going so far.
But you've got a Republican Congress and a Republican Senate. Impeaching is going to be hard. They're likely to tolerate quite a lot over a 4-year period.
Not only that, I mean, you cannot ignore the fact that there is a very large disenfranchised portion of the population that placed him in the White House, and you can't ignore that. They chose him, and that's how democracy works, whether you like it or not. So notwithstanding the massive protests that you're going to be seeing in and around a Trump presidency, a Trump inauguration, the fact of the matter is he's in the White House. He's going to promulgate many of the policies that he thinks he can get across the line. Whether he's successful in actually getting those written into law, time will tell.
I mean, as a Muslim, as somebody who is involved in financial markets, as somebody who's got to have a global perspective, as somebody who has travelled extensively to the United States in the past, how does this make you feel?
Uncomfortable, to say the least.
But I mean, his anti-Muslim rhetoric has been very, very strong. He may or may not act on basically a passbook system for Muslims and a registration and a file of registration for Muslims, but he might.
Yeah, so the worrying things there, Bruce, is if you have a look at not just what Trump has said, but what some of the people associated with Trump have said. I mean, they've even discussed potential internment camps akin to what the Japanese had during the World War. So that obviously leaves the Muslim population in the United States distinctly uncomfortable. Whether or not he actually promulgates some of that anti-Muslim rhetoric into real policy needs to be seen. That's probably going to be very hard to get across into law.
I suspect it will be, simply because the Constitution of the United States is full of checks and balances, and social and civil society is far stronger today than it was perhaps between 1941 after Pearl Harbor and 1945.
That's not your problem, Bruce. Your problem is that he's given a very public platform to elements of society in the United States to effectively entrench hate speech, to entrench a negative sentiment towards certain parts of the population. That's destructive. That's going backward. And this is a global trend. You're seeing deglobalization. You're seeing more isolationism.
But that's the biggest threat, isn't it? I mean, here it's almost as if Donald Trump wants to take America back to what it was when it used to make everything that everybody else wanted to buy. Globalization made it a lot cheaper to make it elsewhere. Economies benefited around the world. But suddenly there was the jobs issue. He's turned that into an election promise to bring the jobs back home again. It's something that won't last because it becomes anti-competitive and becomes self-destructive in the longer term. But still, he's determined to go through with it.
Yeah, it obviously is a lot more nuanced than that. I mean, global value chains have become a lot more decentralized. You know, the United States might be the best at the intellectual property component, but not necessarily at producing this widget at the lowest cost. I think the big trend to watch here is if this results in trade wars, which are very likely. I mean, he's already signaled TPP and NAFTA to be coming up for renegotiation. If you go into a global trade war, that may actually serve to be quite inflationary in the United States. It will actually erode the spending power of the very middle class that he's out there saying he wants to protect, and at the same time might have quite a negative spillover in terms of global growth dynamics. China in particular is quite exposed, but it's not just China. There are countries like South Africa, or just generally Africa, under the AGOA agreement, which at this point in time does appear secure. But if global trade takes a step back, if we deglobalize, that on an aggregate basis may well be negative for growth over the longer term.
Wasn't Xi Jinping, the Chinese premier, interesting in Davos this week? He was. Somebody made the comment, I forget who it was, but Xi Jinping delivered the sort of speech you would expect an American president to be making in Davos, not the Chinese president.
Indeed, and I'm glad you bring that up, because I mean, Xi Jinping was out there very much playing the statesman, the global statesman. And as you have a more isolationist United States on a geopolitical basis, that plays squarely into China's playbook. Remember, China is trying to entrench itself as a global power. There was a fascinating article in the FT about a week ago that had a look at how China tried to entrench its control over global, its maritime trade lanes and so forth. China is playing a long game here, and a more reductionist, isolationist United States will allow China in selected spheres to flex its muscles and entrench its relationships.
So South Africa's foreign policy strategy of the last 10 years or so, which has been more to focus on China and less, keep your friends where they are, America and Europe, for example, but a greater focus on China, could actually pay off for us.
It could. I think South Africa is a small, open, emerging market economy, needs to keep our trade relations as diverse as possible. And interestingly enough, the rise of China, provided that there isn't any massive dislocation to the Chinese economy, could well play into countries like South Africa's favor. A good example of this, a lot of people miss this, is in December last year, the Chinese, in terms of their currency basket, the renminbi basket, downweighted the US dollar, downweighted the euro, and included into the basket the South African rand, the Turkish lira, Korean won. So they've incorporated more emerging market currencies into that. Incidentally, the rand's weighting in that Chinese basket is now around 1.8%. This is part of a trend of a greater internationalization of the renminbi as a currency of global trade. It goes hot on the heels of the fact that the Chinese have extended bilateral swap lines to a lot of the emerging markets that are their trading partners. As I mentioned, the Chinese are playing a long game, and as the US recedes from the global arena, China will be there to exert its influence.
And that's probably the biggest impact of Donald Trump's presidency, and it hasn't even started yet. But by this time tomorrow, President Donald Trump. A year ago, you would have had me locked up in an asylum for even suggesting it was possible. Mohammed Nalla, thank you very much. Mohammed Nalla is Head of Strategic Research and Global Markets at Nedbank Corporate and Investment Bank. Thank you for watching this evening. We'll speak to you on the other side of Donald Trump.